A new poll released by EWTN and Real Clear Politics reveals that while the majority of American Catholic voters want some limits on abortion, just 9% of them hold the view of the Catholic Church on abortion, that the killing of unborn children in the womb is gravely evil and never acceptable. Catholics who participated in the poll were asked a number of questions about American abortion policy and how it relates to their faith. The results convey that there is much confusion among Catholics when it comes to church teaching on abortion. Pollsters also found that similarly to Americans in general, Catholics in our country don't understand the extremism of Roe v. Wade or what current laws on abortion are now that Roe v. Wade has been overruled. And joining me now via Skype for analysis of all of this is Dr. Matthew Bunson, our EWTN News executive editor, and Washington bureau chief Carl Cannon at Real Clear Politics. Thank you both so much for joining me, gentlemen. Matthew, I want to start with you. The Catholic Church informs us that abortion is the preeminent moral issue and that we must pray and work to end abortion. From your point of view, what are the reasons that Catholics in our country are confused about this clear teaching?
Well, as our poll found, 65% of all Catholics across the board believe that abortion conflicts with Catholic teaching. 25% say that it doesn't, and a significant number, actually 10%, aren't sure. When we look at that number, then we're talking about 35% of Catholics either think it doesn't conflict with church teaching or aren't sure. That's a sizable group of Catholics. We can derive some confidence and some optimism out of this in some ways, because when we look at that important statistic of Catholics who go to Mass on a more regular basis, I'm talking about what I call weekly plus Catholics, compared to those who go monthly to yearly or those who less than yearly or never, 77% of weekly plus Catholics recognize that abortion conflicts with Catholic teaching. Now, that, from our standpoint, of course, is terribly low. But it tells us that the more engaged Catholics are with Mass, with the sacraments, and with their faith, the more likely they are to understand where the Church actually stands on the question of abortion. Not that that has ever been called into question.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
So in terms of the confusion that exists is a failure, then, we can see in catechesis, in formation. And this cuts across so many other categories that we've been polling now for several years, including belief in the Eucharist, how often they go to confession. So this taps into, I think, a much wider problem that we have as a church in terms of formation and actually helping people to understand what the church teaches. That's on us to correct.
Right, right. And Carl, some good news here, Matthew was just speaking to this, is that a strong majority, 82% of Catholics, believe abortion should be limited to some extent. But why do you think there's such a large discrepancy between Catholics who want abortion limits and Catholics who want to end abortions altogether?
Well, there's a long history of Roman Catholic politicians telling the American people, my Catholicism is my faith, but if I'm elected, I won't, the Pope doesn't tell me what to do. I'll be the people's representative. It starts with John F. Kennedy, and it goes through President Biden, the second Catholic president, includes Nancy Pelosi. And so you have a group of people, Mario Cuomo in New York, mostly Democrats, who are pro-choice, and they'll say something like, I'm pro-life in my personal life, or they have some thing. But there's a lot of Catholic Democrats out there who it's a fuzzy message that they're getting. They think you can be a good Catholic and still be on this one issue, kind of deviate from the orthodoxy. And it's a mixed message they're receiving. So I don't know that these voters are behaving irrationally. Matthew thinks that the church has to do a better job of educating, and that may be true, but there's, one of our two great major political parties is kind of trying to fuzzy the issue deliberately. And I don't say that in a pejorative way. I just think that, they're uncomfortable with it, but they don't want to get against the party, and they don't want against the church. So they sort of elide around the issue.
Right. And it's no question then that these Catholics are confused if leaders who, claim that they're part of their church are saying something contrary to what the church teaches. And Matthew, this poll also reaffirmed that some Catholics, along with most Americans, don't understand the extreme abortion policies that existed in our country because of Roe v. Wade, or what overruling that case actually means. 47% of Catholics believe that Roe should have been upheld. Now, With Roe gone, can you speak to the importance of clarifying what this decision means as something that should empower Catholics to speak into this issue more?
Well, that's right. This poll, I think, gets to the heart in many ways of the contradiction that exists among many Catholics. As you note, 47% of Catholics think that Roe should not have been overturned. 42% believe that it should have been, and everything sent back to the states. And yet we have, as you noted, 82% of Catholics believe that some kinds of regulation should be imposed on abortion. We can look at the individual numbers as to where they stand on that, on the individual ways of regulating abortion. But that's really important because it tells us that so many Catholics don't actually understand what Roe did, which was to unleash an abortion regime on the United States that is essentially unfettered. So for Catholics at this point, to where we are with Roe, as we're seeing in this Kansas referendum, this is an important opportunity to teach, but also to, as you note, to speak into this issue in our culture. And the way we do that is on the local level, it's in our families, reminding people about what Roe actually did. From a crass political standpoint, that's an important message as well, because when people begin to understand what Roe actually did, here we are 50 years on, the levels of support for Roe drop sharply. So again, this is an important moment culturally as we head into not just the midterms, but also as we're moving now into this post-Roe era.
Right, that education is so important now more than ever. And Carl, let's briefly touch on those midterm elections Matthew just alluded to. You know, given the results of this poll and the contentiousness of this debate across our country, how do you think abortion legislation and jurisprudence is going to impact voters leading into the elections?
Well, you know, that's a good question, and we're not sure. The Democrats think this issue is going to help them. They say overturning Roe v. Wade took away women's rights, and they're pressing it hard in the campaign trail. I've not seen any data in this poll or other surveys that shows it moves the needle much. I think Catholic voters are actually more concerned about, you know, the economy and other issues, social justice, attacks on the church. This poll also found that Catholic voters are intensely concerned about, you know, the curriculum in schools and that they want to have, parents want to have some say in it. And Catholic parents were big on that. But to your this precise question, you know, this issue now does move to the states. And I'm old enough to remember when the opposition, I grew up in California, and Ronald Reagan signed a bill liberalizing abortion. And in those days, Republicans were for it, and the Democrats, especially Catholic Democrats, were opposed to it. And the Catholic Democrats in Sacramento and some of the bishops warned Reagan what would happen. Governor Reagan said, well, there's just this, you know, it's the health of the mother. And they said, that's a loophole that will result in millions of abortions. Reagan didn't believe them. He felt later betrayed by the pro-choice side and became an ardent pro-life politician, even though he wasn't Catholic. And so now we're going back in time. The conversation goes to the states. And what Matthew's saying is that these debates are going to be held, you know, in local parishes and in the counties, but also in state legislatures and states across the country. We won't end up with the same laws, but it's going to be a time where pro-life Catholics can explain to people not just what Catholic teaching is, but what the law allowed under Roe and what they think it should allow in the future. And I think you'll get more compromise than you've had in the past, but we'll see.
Yes, very interesting. It's important to look at the history on this. Thank you both for your insights on all of these findings. Dr. Matthew Bunson of EWTN News and Carl Cannon of Real Clear Politics.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.